This is the Open University.
Systems of recording sound come in the form of variations of magnetization. Along a continuous tape of or coated with or impregnated with ferromagnetic material. In recording, the tape is drawn at constant speed through the air gap of an electromagnet, energized by the audio frequency current derived from a microphone.
Hello, I'm back, and slightly the worse for wear after essentially a month of travel. Always delightful being in Paris with my girlfriend and seeing the Asian art fair, the FIAC, lots of art in Paris and lots of lunches at the IKEA. My favourite place to eat lunch in central Paris is the new urban IKEA. You don't need a car. This is the way of the future. You just need your little electric scooter or a bicycle, or just walk on your feet, you know. Forget cars, forget this kind of old CO2 intensive, carbon monoxide emitting transport, private transport. 21st century is for public transport, for getting rid of all those emissions, for getting back into our bodies, using them again. So walking around enormous art exhibitions like the Grand Palais where the FIAC was held, and just seeing other people's art. Wonderful. The music which introduced this Open University this week is Ali Smith singing a song set to music by me, or set to music which I've purloined from somewhere else. And Ali Smith became a sort of... the Ali Index was something I was using on this trip. I'll explain what that is a bit later. But for now, I'm going to do something very embarrassing. Ali Smith, if you read her Paris Review interview, you can read that she tells us that she, when she was at Aberdeen University, same time I was there, she wrote terrible poetry, very bad poetry. And that's not, just to prove that that's not hyperbolic, I found this old poetry collection, a book called Scratchings, Prose and Poems, which was 20 pence or more you could donate to the Creative Writing Group, which at the time included Kenny Farquharson, who went on to be a journalist in Scotland, Nicholas Curry, who went on to be Momus, and Leintia Hinchins, who went on to be my first girlfriend, and a certain Alison Smith, who went on to be Ali Smith. And she's got some poems in here. And one of them says, what does it say? I've lost it now. I think there's three of them in here. And it's called Lexical Intercourse. It says, I don't want to bear my virginity vicinity just because society wants proof of femininity. I'll just wait the one who will make me sing inside my head without a song to come along until he's someone much too special to be wrong. Until he's someone much too special to be wrong. So she hadn't yet chosen her later orientation. But I won't say any more than that, because one of the things I've been doing this week is going through my book on the so-called legal read with the New York lawyer employed by Farrar, Straus and Giroux, to make sure that I don't give too much personal stuff away. So I've had to change all the names of my ex-girlfriends, including actually the one I just named there as having been in the Creative Writing Group with me, Leintia Hinchins. Leintia being, of course, the Flemish for Little Helen. Helen was her British name. She had one British parent and one Belgian parent, and so I was sitting there in a hotel in Edinburgh, talking to my lawyer in New York, and the lawyer's saying, "Well, I'm not sure if we just called her Leintia, people can still identify who that is, and I'm still on, like most of my exes, I'm still on very good terms with, and." I can't see why they would object to being in my autobiography. The thing is that if you make a memoir, and I've got a very delicate balance, a careful balance between fiction and truth. So between a kind of playful postmodern structure, which is that the dead are narrating my life. They've been forced as some hellish kind of punishment to narrate my life. But that the details that are coming through in their kind of ectoplasmic jets of narrative are the real details of my life, with real names and things in there. But my lawyer's really not too keen on the real names. They're trying to limit the damages, the legal damages. which the book could bring on the heads of the publishers. So unfortunately, that subtle balance between fiction and truth has been muddied, has been sort of twisted a little bit. But yeah, what was I going to tell you? The Ali Smith Index. I was travelling after Paris, still staying on ground transport. I took the train to Calais, I took the ferry, Calais-Dover. I tried to negotiate the very pedestrian, unfriendly exit from Dover, where you basically have to cross a roundabout and jump over a fence and, sort of navigate your way around trucks and traffic to get into this town centre, to get to Dover Priory Station. Then I took a train to London, then the new Azuma train, which is actually a Japanese Hitachi train, London to Edinburgh. I saw my mother, took the train then Edinburgh to Inverness, which is the end of the train line as far as my journey was concerned. It does continue up to Thurso, but there are no train lines, thanks to one of the great villains of transport history, Dr. Beeching, who cut all these so-called apparently unnecessary train lines. They just loved cars in the 20th century. In some places like Newcastle, the whole centre of the city is just autoroutes and highways and freeways going in and under, ducking over the town centre. There's very little left of the old 19th century town centre. In some places you had campaigners, like in Manhattan. The fact we have a nice district for the super rich now called Soho is down to Jane Jacobs, who was the urbanist who campaigned against Robert Moses putting these snaking, villainous, polluting highways through the centre of Manhattan. They were going to demolish pretty much the whole of the wrought iron district, which is now one of the most sought after parts of Manhattan, in Soho. But anyway, Inverness is unfortunately where you have to get off the train and get on a bus if you're going to the west of Scotland, if you're going to the Outer Hebrides. And right in front of the bus station there's a library where they have, I imagined, because Ali Smith comes from Inverness, they'd have lots of Ali Smith novels in the library. Unfortunately, they didn't have one. They had a photocopy of the front of Public Library and Other Stories by Ali Smith on a notice board that said local authors. But they didn't have the actual book. You could just see the front. You could see that she was recognised as a local author. What they had on the shelves, where Ali Smith books should be, were Anna Smith books, which are these sort of embossed tartan noir crime paperbacks by, it turns out, the journalist who came to Paris when I got married and ran away with Shazna in 1994 to Paris. The Daily Record somehow had spies in the registry office or something and sent a journalist from the Daily Record after us, who was this Anna Smith, who's now a very successful author and has usurped Ali Smith on the shelves of the Inverness Public Library in her own hometown. I had dinner with Shazna in Hamburg, actually, just before I left for Paris in October. And that was interesting because we hadn't seen each other for 10 years. She works now for the Wall Street Journal in New York, and she lives in Harlem. She's doing very well. She's on her third marriage. And she just laughed when I told her that Salvador Dali recounts our marriage as a homosexual love affair. So I think she's looking forward to that. And she doesn't mind being named, of course. I have the right to tell my own story. This is what my lawyer keeps telling me. As long as it's public personalities or, I'm allowed to tell my own story, but a lot of details have been changed. Excuse me, I'm slightly suffering from a cold. So I then took a bus, which is my least favourite mode of transport, a bus from Inverness to Ullapool, then took a boat across the Minch, it's called. This is one of the most notoriously stormy and uncomfortable pieces of water in Britain, dividing the mainland of Scotland, the north, the highlands of Scotland, from the Outer Hebrides and the port of Stornoway, which is where I was engaged to do 2 performances. As I was gliding in very unseasonably calm weather across the Minch, I was listening to one of my favourite films, which is Peter Greenaway's A Walk Through H.
At the end of the field came the gate. Hal Sloper called it the Owl Gate. It was to introduce perhaps the most significant map, the Amsterdam map. I had known in advance that this map would be significant. Up until my possession of it, Any accumulation of maps I might have made was unplanned, fortuitous. It was only after I had been persuaded to steal this map did I look for a map in everything I possessed, and in most things I didn't possess as well. I had no idea how to use it. As far as I could see, no road was more clearly marked than any other. Cautiously, I followed what I considered to be an amenable route, and soon had to retrace my path. Up until I stole this map, I'd made no mistakes about collecting the right information for this journey. After it was mine, my mistakes were legion. I collected rubbish, worthless junk. Tal Slooper, on the evening of my last illness, waded through that worthless ephemera with a frown, tossing the papers in the air like confetti. Yet it was Tal Slooper who had cajoled me into possessing this map. He said it was imperative that it should be mine. This map that had belonged, technically, to the keeper of the owls at the Amsterdam Zoo.
He made these short films with a sort of very objective 1950s style narrator and lots of sort of Rococo fiction accompanying structuralist narratives in 1978. And the other film I really love from that period from him is called Vertical Features Remake. And actually one of the things I did in Paris was to see my friend Gilles Weinzepflin's new film, which is called Le Lizard Vert, the green boundary or the green border. It's about a forgotten border in Alsace-Lorraine between France and Germany. And that reminded me a little bit of a Peter Greenaway film because the waypoints, the marking stones of this old 19th century border, which has now been replaced by the new border, which is somewhere totally different. They're numbered stones. So Gilles actually goes and tries to locate as many of these stones. It's a numbered sequence between one, which is up at the Luxembourg border, and 396 or something, which is down by Switzerland. So that whole area, which happens to be from where my girlfriend comes as well, because Gilles and my girlfriend Noemi both come from Mulhouse, which is a town right on the border of Switzerland, near Basel. Switzerland, France, and Germany all meet up in that little corner. And of course, it's rich with history. And so Gilles' film was made for the regional television of that area. And he showed it in a preview cinema in Paris. And it reminded me of Peter Greenaway. So I was listening, because you can listen to A Walk Through H as if it were an audio guide, and it was the excellent preparation for my unreliable tour of Stornoway, which happened on the Saturday, the 2nd of November. That was such stormy weather. It was supposed to happen in the streets of the town itself, but it was such stormy weather that it had to take place indoors in an exhibition of Indian photographs. So I was pointing at pictures of the Taj Mahal and sort of saying that's a true view of the church across the road, which is this rather Calvinist church in reality. And here is where the original chained-up swings used to be, because in the Isle of Lewis, it was notoriously so severely Protestant that they wouldn't allow you to do anything on Sundays, including wouldn't allow children to swing on swings, let alone shops being open. Forget that. And now you can swing on the swings. If they have, I didn't see any swings while I was there. But I also said, for instance, that the Minch was actually a dry seabed, which a crew of 350 people were paid money to rattle tarpaulin sheets and make whooshing sounds with their mouths to simulate the sea. But this proved very much not to be the case when I sailed back, having had some fantastic conversations with my old university friend who was in the creative writing group, Ian Stephen, who is from Stornoway and still lives there, worked a long time for the ocean rescue, the sea rescue there, and he's written a book called The Book of Death and Fish, which is sort of memoir, fictionalized memoir of his life. And but actually my main purpose, I was going to say the sea on the way back, the Minch on the way back was very rough, and it made me realize I don't have my sea legs really for that kind of journey. My main object in going to Stornoway was that I was invited by Andrew Eaton Lewis, who used to be the arts editor of the Scotsman in Edinburgh, and had a nasty experience with a crack den in Leith or something. His house was, unknowingly to him, above a crack den or something, and some mentalists were forcing their way in. He got out of Edinburgh with a kind of apocalyptic sense of wanting to escape cities and feeling that things were just going to get worse in cities as precarians and kind of outsiders menaced to the streets, literally. So he moved to this clifftop in Erd Uig, which is on the very west coast of the Isle of Lewis. And I really wanted to see the old RAF station he'd built. Bought. He bought a sort of range of huts on this sort of clifftop overlooking a bay. And I'd seen postings on social media, and it looked idyllic. He's been there he's now coming into the second winter, and as he puts it, it's the second winter that is the sort of killer in terms of people who've come to see if they can hack it on the islands, the life in the Outer Hebrides. The first winter is kind of a novelty. The second winter is when it really just hits in. It just bites like ice. The idea that this is just how it is here. The wind is always going to be blowing hard. The waves are always going to be crashing and lashing against the rocks and the shingle shore down below. You're basically always going to be battling with nature and the elements. And you've sort of sought out hardship. Some people do that for artistic reasons. My cousin, Justin Curry, was also in the Isle of Lewis when I was there. He was writing songs which he self-deprecatingly, a bit like Ali Smith, self-deprecatingly telling the Paris Review that her poems are terrible. Justin texted my sister saying that he was writing some awful songs, terrible songs. I imagined a sort of Bon Iver-esque album of isolation and desolation. And he said he might come to my concert, but he never showed up in the end. I don't know what he would have made of it. I sort of joked that I was going to rush release my own album of isolation and desolation, which I would call Parachute, based on just a few minutes of posing for selfies down on the shingle beach. I kind of came away from Andrew's place thinking I couldn't hack it. I wouldn't be able to live like that. I wouldn't like to have to depend on a car. I got car sick even just being driven by Andrew on these twisty roads, these one-track roads between his house and Stornoway. He has to do that journey pretty much every day. He works a lot with, he's working with this book festival, the Anne Lanter Book Festival. And but also in Edinburgh, he's commuting by air to Edinburgh a lot to continue to cover cultural events for the Scotsman, like the festival. But I don't know, I kind of dream of my own life, my own post-apocalyptic, post-urban lifestyle in Japan, if anywhere, buying one of these cheap second-hand houses, abandoned houses in Japan. Or living a bit like my friend Jan does in Gerswalde, north of here. But I really am such a city person. It's always such a relief for me to get back to a city, even a town like Stornoway that has shops, and people walking around and you don't need a car. It's super important to me. They've pedestrianised, bless them, the centre of Stornoway, and so it's a very livable town. But also I don't feel at home in Britain in general at all these days. So it was a relief to me to take the ferry. I took the ferry from Newcastle to Amsterdam on the way back to the mainland, as I like to call continental Europe. I knew, I was travelling on the 31st of October, I knew that Brexit wasn't going to happen. I knew there was going to be another extension. I hope these extensions are just endlessly continued, despite Macron's urge to kick us out of Europe. But I was, all these Geordie pensioners were sort of with me on the bus, going from the boat to the docks at Amsterdam to the central train station. And just having to listen to them talking about how immigrants were just coming to Britain to claim benefits and all the usual sort of Brexit bullshit which you hear and which is encouraged by British television, unfortunately, just really turned my flesh. And it was such a relief to get onto a German train in Amsterdam and head back to Berlin. I got a bit of a headache. I get an eye headache, partly because there was such a heavy swell on the boat coming back that I wasn't able to eat properly, and that's always dangerous for my eye, for the condition I have in my eye. I don't know. I'm kind of I'm asking these questions to myself. How then shall we live? How could I live in the future? Could I live outside cities? What cities are left for me to live in? I'm really enjoying Paris. I'm really enjoying Berlin. I enjoy this bipolarity of going Paris, Berlin. I don't know how long I'll continue to have a European citizenship automatically, whether I have to work on that. These are all the sort of the unknowns of the future, the known unknowns of the future. We're coming to the end of the decade, and that's particularly interesting for me to look at the kind of concerns and styles of the decade, the styles and concerns of society, but also those of me, myself. This is something I used to do when I wrote a written blog, Click Opera, in the last decade, the noughties. What has been the style of the noughties? That was something I actually asked myself. I think I'd have to do, maybe next time I'll do this, do an A to Z of the teens, the teenies, if we want to call it that, the last decade, most of which I've spent expending CO2 in long-haul flights by living in Osaka on a tourist visa. So the idea of being a tourist was very important for me centrally this decade. And having to do that by flying a lot, at least 6 long-haul flights a year, which I've kind of exited that lifestyle because it doesn't seem sustainable, doesn't seem helpful. It was kind of enjoyable for me, but I did come to dread the long-haul flights. And this year is the first year I haven't done that. I haven't taken a long flight anywhere. I haven't taken many flights at all. I went to Barcelona entirely by ground transport and back. Did the same this time, Berlin, Paris, Edinburgh, the Outer Hebrides, and back all the way on ground transport. I've got my personal hierarchy of, trains are up there. I love trains, especially the new Hitachi Azumas, which are running up the East Coast line now between London and Edinburgh. Not so much boats, because the sea can be a little rough, and I don't take to that very well, despite having ancestors who were ferry captains on the Clyde and who wrote poetry in Gaelic. I can't read their poetry now. Angus McKechnie, Donald McKechnie. I can't read what they wrote about the Highland clearances. I hardly know anything about the Highland clearances because I wasn't taught in school about that. But you pick things up on your way as you travel. I think I have to do this for the next video. Actually, I have to talk about the sort of A to Z of the tweenies, of the teenies of this decade, and how my concerns have probably diverged a bit from the concerns of society in general. I think you do this, you get more wrapped up in your own concerns, and more appalled in many ways by other people's wrong-headedness. Certainly since 2016, that's been a major theme of this decade for me. Just the way that we're living in an idiocracy. I think that'll be the title of the next video, Idiocracy. This one, don't know what I'll call this one, ground travel, something like that. See you next time.
Open University.
Systems of recording